Yiggity, and we are back, and I ain't gonna waste no time because I know y'all want some crime, so we just gonna jump right into it. We got the 7 most evilest, and when I say the evilest, 7 of the most evilest inmates in the Clinton Correctional Facility. Let's check him out.
Number 1. David Sweat. David Sweat was born on June 14, 1980, in the Binghamton metropolitan area of New York, and raised by his single mother Pamela Sweat, along with 2 sisters. His criminal activity started as a juvenile. In 1996, at age 16, he faced charges for attempted second-degree burglary. In 1997, he pleaded guilty to attempted burglary and served approximately 2 years at Washington Correctional Facility.
What up,
he was
Flex?
paroled in June 1999 and completed parole supervision in 2001. On July 4, 2002, in the early morning hours, Sweat, along with accomplices Jeffrey Nabinger Jr., his cousin, and Sean Duvall, burglarized a gun store in Great Bend, Pennsylvania, stealing firearms. They crossed into New York and stopped in a park in Kirkwood, near Deputy Kevin Tarzia's home, to transfer the stolen guns between vehicles. Tarzia, a 36-year-old, 13-year veteran of the Broome County Sheriff's Office, approached the group. Sweat and Nabinger shot Tarzia multiple times, striking him more than 12 times according to court records, with some accounts specifying 15 shots, after which Sweat drove the vehicle over the deputy. Tarzia died at the scene. The 3 men were arrested days later. In 2003, Sweat and Nabinger pleaded guilty to first-degree murder to avoid the death penalty, and each received a sentence of life without parole. Duvall pleaded guilty to second-degree criminal possession of a weapon. Sweat arrived at Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora in October 2003 as a central monitoring case due to the nature of his crime requiring close supervision. Sweat maintained a largely satisfactory disciplinary record at Clinton. He worked in the prison tailor shop and later the library as a clerk and typist, earning 26 cents per hour. He was housed in the honor block for good behavior. He became friends with fellow inmate Richard Matt around 2010, after both were in the honor block and shared an interest in art. Matt painted and encouraged Sweat to draw and paint. They worked alongside each other in Tailor Shop 1, where they met civilian seamstress Joyce Mitchell. Mitchell developed personal relationships with both men, providing them extra food and engaging in sexual contact with each at different times. Corrections officer Gene Palmer also formed a close association with them, accepting at least 6 paintings from Sweat and at least 10 from Matt in exchange for favors, including extra privileges and access. Palmer was known to refer to them as his boys. In September 2014, Sweat was removed from Tailor Shop 1 after prison staff noted his inappropriate relationship with Mitchell. He was reassigned to the library. In January 2015, Palmer advocated for Sweat's return to a tailor shop job, and he was placed in Tailor Shop 8, the farthest from Mitchell's shop. Sweat also requested and received a cell moved back next to Matt on January 24, 2015, in cell A6-23, adjacent to Matt's A6-22. Sweat and Matt began actively planning their escape in January 2015. Sweat later stated the idea stemmed in part from resentment over his temporary removal from the tailor shop. Over the next 3 months, they used hacksaw blades and other tools smuggled in by Mitchell inside frozen hamburger meat that Palmer delivered to their cells. They worked at night, cutting holes in the steel walls at the backs of their cells. They accessed the catwalks behind the cells using pipes as handholds and footholds to descend 3 tiers to the subterranean utility level. They navigated a labyrinth of dimly lit tunnels, cutting through walls and eventually slicing into an 18-inch steam pipe that ran under the prison. They prepared the route by exploring the area nightly and creating openings large enough to squeeze through. On the night of June 5, 2015, shortly after 11 p.m., they slipped through the holes they had cut, descended to the basement level, crawled through the prepared openings and the steam pipe, and emerged from a manhole onto a street in the village of Dannemora, just after midnight on June 6, 2015. This was the first escape from the high-security section of Clinton in over 100 years. Their original plan involved Mitchell picking them up with a getaway car and supplies, but she failed to appear. They proceeded on foot in street clothes they had prepared, heading into the Adirondack terrain toward the Canadian border. The escape was discovered at the 5:17 a.m. bed check on June 6, 2015. A full prison search confirmed they were missing, and a manhunt involving over 1,300 officers from local, state, federal, and Canadian agencies began immediately. The search cost New York State approximately $23 million in overtime, with additional expenses for repairs and security. On June 12, 2015, Mitchell was arrested and charged with promoting prison contraband and criminal facilitation. Palmer was later charged as well. During the manhunt, DNA from Sweat and Matt was found in a hunting cabin near Malone on June 22nd. Matt and Sweat split up after Matt began slowing Sweat down. On June 26, 2015, Matt was shot and killed by a U.S. Customs and Border Protection officer in Malone after pointing an empty rifle at police. Sweat continued alone. On June 28, 2015, in the town of Constable, less than 2 miles from the Canadian border, New York State Police Sergeant Jay Cook spotted Sweat in an alfalfa field. After a brief chase and refusal to stop, Sweat was shot twice in the shoulders and taken into custody. He was treated at Albany Medical Center. Sweat was returned to state custody and charged with escape in the first degree and promoting prison contraband. In late 2015, he pleaded guilty in Clinton County Court to those counts. On February 3, 2016, he was sentenced to 3 additional consecutive terms of 3.5 to 7 years each, plus nearly $80,000 in restitution for prison damage caused by the escape. These sentences run consecutive to his original life without parole. Following recapture, Sweat was placed in solitary confinement and subjected to an internal disciplinary hearing that imposed 6 years in the special housing unit. He has been transferred multiple times between facilities, including periods in maximum security units,
LA.
and has spent extended time in solitary confinement with 23-hour daily lockdown, no packages, commissary, or phone privileges
I
for
was
years.
thinking that too.
Reports indicate he has been moved through at least 9 different prisons since 2015 and claims to have remained in solitary for a decade. In a 2025 jailhouse interview conducted while housed at Mid-State Correctional Facility, he stated his only regret from the 2015 events was choosing Matt as a partner, claiming Matt slowed him down and talked irrationally. He described his current daily routine in an 18 by 5 foot cell and noted he had not had a visitor in 3 years prior to that interview. Sweat remains incarcerated, serving life without parole for the murder of Deputy Kevin Tarsia, with the additional escape-related time added. He has been cycled through Clinton Correctional Facility's maximum security unit at various points post-recapture as part of ongoing transfers within the New York State Department of Corrections. And
Hey, I'm sorry, but due to last night, all that stimulation we got from them top 10s, I need some worse crimes than that. It seems like they didn't do enough. I need more crime. So let me just go ahead and usher right on over here. We're gonna go city for city. I found Louisiana, y'all. Let's see who the top killers and dealers are in Louisiana. Let's go.
10 most notorious inmates in Louisiana prisons. Louisiana has one of the most infamous prison systems in America, including the massive Louisiana State Penitentiary, better known as Angola. Behind its walls are serial killers, former celebrities, convicted murderers, and prisoners whose cases made national headlines. Here are 10 of the most high-profile inmates currently serving time in Louisiana prisons. Number 10. Clifford Etienne. Clifford Etienne was once a professional heavyweight boxer known as the Black Rhino.
He looked like a Black Rhino
included
too.
Fights against some major names, including Mike Tyson. But after his career declined, Etienne's life took a dramatic turn. In 2005, he was convicted following a violent crime spree in Baton Rouge and received a lengthy prison sentence. Today, the former heavyweight contender remains incarcerated in Louisiana, where he has gained attention for creating artwork behind bars. Number 9. Mystical. Michael Tyler, better known as rapper Mystical, became one of the biggest stars to emerge from New Orleans during the late 1990s and early 2000s. His career included hit records, Grammy nominations, and worldwide recognition, but his legal problems eventually overshadowed his music career. In 2026, Tyler pleaded guilty to third-degree rape and received a 20-year prison sentence. He was later transferred to Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola. Number 8. Will Hayden. Will Hayden became nationally famous as the owner of Red Jacket Firearms and the star of Discovery Channel's reality series Sons of Guns. At the height of the show's popularity, Hayden was a recognizable television personality. That career collapsed after he was arrested and later convicted of serious sexual offenses. Hayden received multiple life sentences and remains incarcerated in Louisiana. His convictions also resulted in Sons of Guns being removed from television. Number 7. Nathaniel Code. Nathaniel Code is one of Louisiana's longest-serving death row prisoners. Code was convicted of murdering 4 people in Shreveport during the 1980s. Investigators also suspected him in connection with other killings. Although not every accusation resulted in a conviction, he was sentenced to death and has spent decades in Louisiana custody. His case remains one of the state's longest-running capital punishment cases. Number 6. Anthony Bell. Anthony Bell was convicted following a 2006 mass killing in Baton Rouge. The case began at a church before continuing at another location, leaving 5 people dead. Bell was arrested shortly afterward and eventually convicted on multiple counts of first-degree murder. He received several death sentences and remains on Louisiana's death row. Number 5. Corey Miller. Corey Miller is better known to music fans as C-Murder, a former rapper with No Limit Records. During the late 1990s, Miller achieved major commercial success, alongside artists including Master P and Silk the Shocker. But in 2002, 16-year-old Steve Thomas was killed at a nightclub in Harvey, Louisiana. Miller was eventually convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. He has continued to maintain his innocence, and his case has attracted attention from celebrities and criminal justice advocates. Number 4. Antoinette Frank. Antoinette Frank's case shocked New Orleans because she wasn't just accused of murder, she was a police officer. In 1995, Frank was convicted of killing fellow New Orleans police officer Ronald Williams, along with siblings Ha and Quang Vu, during a robbery at a Vietnamese restaurant. She was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Frank remains one of Louisiana's most infamous prisoners, and the state's only woman under a death sentence. Number 3, Daniel Blank. Daniel Blank became known as the River Parish's serial killer. During the late 1990s, Blank was convicted in connection with a series of killings targeting people in communities between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. Several victims were elderly. Blank received multiple life sentences as well as a death sentence for one of the murders. His crimes made him one of the most notorious killers in modern Louisiana history. Number 2, Sean Vincent Gillis. Sean Vincent Gillis is one of several serial killers who operated around Baton Rouge during the same general period. Gillis was arrested in 2004 after investigators connected him to multiple murders. He eventually admitted responsibility for several killings and was convicted in separate cases. Gillis received multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. He remains incarcerated at Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola. Number 1, Ronald Dominique. At number 1 is Ronald Dominique, sometimes called the Bayou Strangler. Dominique operated across southeastern Louisiana for years before being arrested in 2006. Authorities ultimately connected him to numerous murders, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in Louisiana history. Rather than face a possible death sentence, Dominique pleaded guilty to 8 murders in 2008. He received 8 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole.
Damn.
Investigators have attributed many additional killings to Dominique, and his case remains one of the darkest chapters in Louisiana criminal history.
You got to be a special kind of person to make it to the top of a, he got a tiny face. MKK, what up? Daniel, what up? What's that about Betty White? You know what? Let's go to a place that nobody ever thinks about. Nobody ever says anything about Idaho. Is this some bad mofos in Idaho?
Inmates in Idaho Department of Corrections. Idaho may not have one of the largest prison systems in America, but some of the inmates serving time there are connected to crimes that gained national attention. For this list, death row prisoners have been excluded. These are 10 notorious inmates currently under the Idaho Department of Correction. Number 10, Daniel Howard. Former Idaho State Police trooper Daniel Howard was convicted in the death of his wife, Kendi Howard. Prosecutors argued that Howard killed his wife and attempted to make her death appear self-inflicted. He was ultimately convicted of second-degree murder and domestic battery. Howard received a life sentence and remains in the custody of the Idaho Department of Correction. Number 9, Mark Lankford. Mark Lankford has spent decades behind bars for the murders of Robert and Cheryl Brevance. The couple disappeared while camping in Idaho in 1983. Their deaths eventually led investigators to Lankford and his brother. After years of trials, appeals, and legal challenges, Mark Lankford was again convicted of both murders in 2019. He received consecutive life sentences. Number 8, Brian Dripps. For more than 20 years, the murder of Angie Dodge remained one of Idaho's most infamous cold cases. Another man was originally convicted before DNA evidence eventually cleared him. Investigators later focused on Brian Dripps, who lived across the street from Dodge at the time of her 1996 death. Dripps eventually pleaded guilty to murder and received a life sentence. Number 7. Timmy Kinner. Timmy Earl Kinner was responsible for one of Boise's most shocking acts of violence. In 2018, Kinner attacked people attending a child's birthday celebration at an apartment complex. 9 people were injured, including several children, and 3-year-old Ruya Kadir later died. Kinner pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and numerous additional violent offenses. He received 2 consecutive fixed life sentences without the possibility of parole. Number 6. Brian Draper and Tori Adamczyk.
What up?
Brian Draper and Tori Adamczyk were high school students when they murdered their 16-year-old classmate, Cassie Jo Stoddard, in 2006. The pair had discussed their plans beforehand and recorded portions of the events surrounding the crime. Investigators recovered those recordings, providing powerful evidence against them. Both teenagers were convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy and sentenced to life without parole. They remain incarcerated under the Idaho Department of Correction. Number 5. Sarah Johnson. Sarah Johnson was just 16 years old when her parents, Alan and Diane Johnson, were killed inside their Bellevue, Idaho home in 2003. Prosecutors accused Johnson of murdering them following conflict over her relationship with an older boyfriend. She was tried as an adult and convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder. Johnson received 2 life sentences without parole and remains incarcerated in Idaho. Number 4. Jorge Lopez Orozco. Jorge Alberto Lopez Orozco was once placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list. He was wanted in connection with the 2002 murders of Rebecca Ramirez and her 2 young children in Idaho. Lopez Orozco fled the United States and remained a fugitive for years before being captured in Mexico. After his return to Idaho, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Number 3. Major John Kaler. Major John Kaler was responsible for a quadruple murder that stunned the small community of Kellogg, Idaho. In 2023, Kaler killed 4 members of a neighboring family. He later pleaded guilty to 4 counts of second-degree murder. Kaler received 4 fixed life sentences, meaning he will spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 2. Lori Vallow. The case of Lori Vallow became one of the most widely followed criminal cases in the United States.
Why?
Vallow was convicted in connection with the deaths of her 2 children, Tylee Ryan and J.J. Vallow, as well as conspiracy in the death of Tammy Daybell. The case involved months of disappearances, investigations, and disturbing discoveries that attracted worldwide media attention. Vallow was sentenced to multiple terms of life imprisonment without parole. Unlike Chad Daybell, she was not sentenced to death. Number 1. Brian Kohberger. At number 1 is Brian Kohberger. Kohberger was charged with the 2022 murders of 4 University of Idaho students, Madison Mogen, Kaylee Goncalves, Zana Kernadel, and Ethan Chapin. The killings in Moscow, Idaho, triggered a massive investigation and became one of the most closely followed murder cases in recent American history. Kohberger eventually pleaded guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary. He received 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, ensuring he will spend the remainder of his life in prison.
That's crazy. Idaho buck, ain't they? They get it in Idaho. I think we did like the husband and wife killers and stuff before, but I don't think we did the top 10 teen killer couples. That's got a special ring to it. The top 10 teen killer couples. Let's go.
10 high-profile teen killer couples. Teenage relationships are usually remembered for first dates, school dances, and first heartbreaks. But in these 10 cases, young couples became connected to serious homicide cases that made headlines around the world. Some acted together, some blamed each other afterward, and in at least one case, whether one member of the couple was a willing participant remains disputed. Here are 10 high-profile teen killer couples. Number 10. Kim Edwards and Lucas Markham. Kim Edwards and Lucas Markham were both just 14 years old when Edwards' mother and younger sister were murdered at their home in England in April 2016. Investigators determined that the teenage couple had discussed killing members of Edwards' family beforehand. Markham pleaded guilty to 2 murders. Edwards went to trial and was also convicted of both murders. Both were ordered detained indefinitely, with minimum terms initially set at approximately 20 years. Their extremely young ages made the case one of Britain's most notorious crimes involving a teenage couple. Number 9, Tony Fratto and Cody Patton. In West Wendover, Nevada, Tony Fratto and Cody Patton became involved in the 2011 murder of their 16-year-old classmate, Michaela Mickey Costanzo. Patton was 18 when the crime occurred, and Fratto was also a teenager. The two were romantically involved and reportedly planned to marry. Fratto eventually pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and received a sentence that made her eligible for parole. Patton pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and received life without the possibility of parole. The case received national attention and was later featured on Dateline NBC. Number 8, Ashley Jones and Jeremy Hart. In Birmingham, Alabama, 14-year-old Ashley Jones and her 16-year-old boyfriend Jeremy Hart were convicted after an attack on members of Jones' family in 1999. Jones' grandfather, DeRoy Knowles, and her aunt, Dilly Knowles, were killed. Her grandmother and younger sister survived. Court records say Jones's family disapproved of her relationship with Hart and that the teenagers planned the attack together. Hart was convicted of 2 counts of capital murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. Jones was also convicted and originally received mandatory life without parole sentences. Jones' case later became prominent in the national debate over life sentences imposed on very young juvenile offenders. Number 7, Amy Grossberg and Brian Peterson. Amy Grossberg and Brian Peterson were both 18-year-old high school sweethearts when their case became national news in 1996. The couple were charged after the death of their newborn son in Delaware. Both were initially facing first-degree murder charges, but the case ultimately ended differently. Peterson pleaded guilty to manslaughter and received 2 years in prison. Grossberg also pleaded guilty to manslaughter and received 2.5 years. So unlike most of the couples on this list, Grossberg and Peterson were not convicted of murder. Nevertheless, their case became one of the most heavily publicized teenage homicide cases of the 1990s. Number 6, Holly Harvey and Sandy Ketchum. In Georgia, 15-year-old Holly Harvey and her 16-year-old girlfriend Sandy Ketchum were involved in the 2004 murders of Harvey's grandparents, Carl and Sarah Collier. Court records state that the teenagers wanted to leave together and decided to kill the Colliers and take their vehicle. Both teenagers eventually pleaded guilty. Harvey received 2 consecutive life sentences, while Ketchum received 3 concurrent life sentences. The case attracted nationwide attention because of the defendants' ages and the claim that conflict over their relationship helped contribute to what happened. Number 5, Amber Wright and Michael Bargo. In Florida, 15-year-old Amber Wright and her 18-year-old boyfriend Michael Bargo became 2 of the central defendants in the 2011 murder of 15-year-old Seth Jackson. Jackson was Wright's former boyfriend. Authorities said Wright helped lure Jackson to a house as part of a plan involving Bargo and several other young people. Wright was convicted of first-degree murder. Bargo was also convicted of first-degree murder and received a death sentence. The number of young people involved and the relationships connecting them helped make the Seth Jackson case one of Florida's most notorious teenage murder cases. Number 4, Tyler Witt and Stephen Culver. In California, 14-year-old Tyler Witt was dating 19-year-old Stephen Culver when Witt's mother, Joanne Witt, was murdered in 2009. Joanne had opposed the relationship between her teenage daughter and the older Culver.
Rightfully so.
After the murder, Witt and Culver fled together, but were arrested several days later. Witt eventually pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and received 15 years to life. Culver was convicted of first-degree murder and received life without parole. Witt was later granted parole and was released in 2023. Number 3, Aaron Caffey and Charlie Wilkinson. In Texas, 16-year-old Aaron Caffey was dating 18-year-old Charlie Wilkinson when her parents tried to end their relationship. In March 2008, 3 members of Caffey's family were murdered at their home.
Teen couples.
Her father, Terry Caffey, survived. Investigators concluded that Aaron participated in planning the crime with Wilkinson and others. Aaron accepted a plea agreement and received life sentences, with the possibility of parole after decades in prison. Wilkinson received life without the possibility of parole. The case became nationally known because prosecutors argued that the conflict surrounding a teenage relationship helped set the events in motion. Number 2. Diane Zamora and David Graham. Diane Zamora and David Graham seemed destined for successful futures. They were high school honor students who later entered 2 of America's prestigious military academies. But investigators connected them to the December 1995 murder of 16-year-old Adrienne Jones. At the time of the crime, Zamora was 17 and Graham was 18. Prosecutors argued that jealousy over Graham's relationship with Jones provided the motive. Both were eventually convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life imprisonment, with parole eligibility after 40 years. Their seemingly promising backgrounds, combined with the murder allegations, turned the case into a nationwide media sensation. Number 1. Charles Starkweather and Carol Ann Fugate. At number 1 are Charles Starkweather and Carol Ann Fugate, perhaps the most famous young crime couple in American history. In 1958, 19-year-old Starkweather traveled through Nebraska and Wyoming during a murder spree while accompanied by his 14-year-old girlfriend Fugate.
Thanks for the
Starkweather
jewels.
was convicted of murder, sentenced to death, and
P3.
executed in 1959. Fugate was also convicted and received a life sentence. She was eventually paroled in 1976 after serving approximately 18 years, but Fugate's role remains controversial. She maintained that Starkweather had held her against her will and that she was his captive rather than his willing accomplice. Prosecutors and the jury rejected that argument, and debate about her responsibility has continued for decades. The Starkweather and Fugate case became deeply embedded in American popular culture and remains one of the best-known crime stories involving a teenage couple.
Hey, talk about love on a two-way street.
High-profile.
That's real love for you. Is you ready to go out on a killing spree with your shorty? Is you ready to get it in like that? Is you down? All right, so we getting a little closer to the Midwest. Another off-brand place. Let's see what's popping in Iowa.
Home to some of the most shocking criminal cases in the country. From murders that devastated entire families to crimes that drew national attention, these inmates are serving some of the harshest sentences in the state. Here are 10 of the most notorious inmates currently in Iowa prisons. Number 10, Alexander Jackson. In 2021, Alexander Jackson was accused of killing 3 members of his own family inside their Cedar Rapids home. His father, Jan, his mother, Melissa, and his 19-year-old sister, Sabrina. Jackson initially claimed that a masked intruder had entered the house and attacked the family. Investigators soon questioned that account, and prosecutors ultimately argued that Jackson himself was responsible. He was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without parole. Number 9, Willard Miller and Jeremy Goodale. Willard Miller and Jeremy Goodale were teenagers when they became involved in the 2021 killing of their high school Spanish teacher, Nohema Graber, in Fairfield, Iowa. Prosecutors said the crime was connected in part to Miller's concerns about his grade in Graber's class.
Damn, over
Both eventually
grade?
pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. Miller was sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility after 35 years, while Goodale received life with parole eligibility after 25 years. Number 8, Kyle Rick. Kyle Rick was convicted of murdering Algona police officer Kevin Cram in September 2023. Officer Cram had been attempting to arrest Ricka on an outstanding warrant when the encounter turned deadly. Rick fled the area, triggering a large manhunt before he was captured. He was later convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 7, Nicole Finn. Nicole Finn became the focus of one of Iowa's most disturbing child abuse cases. Her adopted daughter, 16-year-old Natalie Finn, died in 2016 after prosecutors said she had endured prolonged neglect and abuse inside the family home. Investigators also uncovered evidence involving the mistreatment of other children in the household. Finn was convicted of first-degree murder and additional charges and received 3 consecutive life sentences. Number 6. Michelle Kehoe. In 2008, Michelle Kehoe attacked her 2 young sons in Buchanan County. Her 2-year-old son Seth died, while her older son survived. Kehoe initially attempted to make investigators believe that someone else was responsible, but evidence eventually pointed back to her. She was convicted of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and child endangerment, and sentenced to
when they say somebody else did it, they was black, by the way.
life without parole. Number 5, Mark Becker. Mark Becker was convicted of the 2009 murder of Ed Thomas, the longtime football coach at Aplington Parkersburg High School. Thomas was widely respected throughout Iowa and had helped lead his community following a devastating tornado the previous year. Becker's attorneys argued that serious mental illness played a major role in the crime, but the jury rejected his insanity defense. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Number 4, Cheyenne Harris. Cheyenne Harris was convicted in a case involving the death of her infant son, Sterling Cohen, in 2017. Prosecutors argued that the 4-month-old child had suffered extreme neglect over an extended period. Harris went on trial in 2019 and was found guilty of first-degree murder and child endangerment, causing death. She was sentenced to the mandatory punishment of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 3, Sean Michael Bentler. Sean Bentler was convicted of murdering 5 members of his own family near Beaumont, Iowa in 2006. The victims were his parents, Michael and Sandra Bentler, along with his 3 teenage sisters. Prosecutors argued that financial issues were part of the motive behind the killings.
Come on.
Bentler was found guilty of 5 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to 5 consecutive life sentences without parole. Number 2, Scott Michael Green. Scott Michael Green was responsible for one of the most shocking attacks on law enforcement in Iowa history. In 2016, Urbandale Officer Justin Martin and Des Moines Police Sergeant Anthony Beminio were killed in separate attacks while inside their patrol vehicles. Green later surrendered to authorities. He eventually pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without parole. Number 1, Christian Bahena Rivera. At number 1 is Christian Bahena Rivera, whose case received national attention following the disappearance of 20-year-old University of Iowa student Molly Tibbetts in 2018. Tibbetts disappeared while out for a run near Brooklyn, Iowa, triggering a massive search. Investigators eventually focused on Bahena Rivera after reviewing surveillance footage showing a vehicle connected to him in the area. He was arrested and later stood trial for first-degree murder. In 2021, a jury found him guilty.
Wait a minute. How he get number 1? Hold on. The dude before him had 5 consecutive. So he get. Come on now. I'm noticing the pattern. How he get number 1?
Bahena Rivera was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
What? How he get? He wasn't the craziest in Iowa. He was not. That's whack. Come on, man. That was disappointing to me. If they would have gave me the dude right before him, yeah, okay, he was the top dude, 5 consecutive. Yeah. Your mom, your dad, and your 3 sisters. Yeah, he's the top dude. What are you talking about? Anyway, let's go ahead and go to the one. I know everybody want to see this one. The one everybody be talking about. Let's see who the top teen killers is from Illinois. Ha ha ha. Yeah. Let's do this one.
Involving offenders who were still teenagers when they committed their crimes. Some became national headlines, while others led to decades of legal battles over how juveniles should be sentenced. Here are 10 of the most high-profile cases. Number 10, New York's Timothy Buss. Timothy Buss was just 13 years old when 5-year-old Tara Sue Huffman was murdered in Bradley, Illinois in 1981.
Damn.
Despite his young age, Buss was transferred to adult court, convicted of murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison. He was paroled in 1993 after serving roughly half his sentence. 2 years later, now an adult, Buss murdered 10-year-old Christopher Meyer.
Again?
He was sentenced to death for the second murder, but that sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment when Illinois cleared its death row in 2003. Number 9, Christian Acevedo. Christian Acevedo was 16 when a shooting outside Benito Juarez Community Academy in Chicago in December 2022 left 2 teenagers dead. The victims were 15-year-old Brandon Perez and 14-year-old Nathan Villegas. 2 other teenagers were wounded. Acevedo eventually pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. In 2024, he was sentenced to 46 years in prison. Number 8, Regina and Margaret DeFrancisco. Sisters, Regina and Margaret DeFrancisco were 17 and 16 when 22-year-old Oscar Velasquez was murdered in Chicago in June 2000. After the killing, the sisters disappeared, beginning a nearly 2-year fugitive hunt. Their case received national exposure on television programs including America's Most Wanted. Margaret was captured in Illinois in 2002, and Regina was later arrested in Texas. Both were eventually convicted of murder. Regina received 35 years. Margaret originally received 46 years, although her sentence was later overturned under juvenile sentencing law,
straight up,
and she was resentenced to 30 years. Number 7, Clifford Baker. Clifford Baker was only 15 years old when he murdered 2 neighbors, John Michael Mike Mann and Deborah Tish, in Farina, Illinois, in August 2010. Baker was prosecuted as an adult and convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder, as well as home invasion. He originally received mandatory life sentences. Because he had been a juvenile at the time of the murders, those sentences were later overturned. After a new sentencing hearing, Baker ultimately received an aggregate sentence of 85 years in prison. Number 6, Eric Robles. In April 1993, 17-year-old Eric Robles became involved in the murders of his parents, Peter and Diana Robles, inside their Bartlett home. Prosecutors said Robles recruited his high school classmate Sean Helgeson to participate in the killings. A jury found Robles guilty, but mentally ill. He was sentenced to natural life imprisonment, and his case later became another example of the complicated legal questions surrounding extreme sentences imposed on juvenile offenders. Number 5, Stephen Feel. Stephen Feel was 17 when he murdered 13-year-old Hillary Norskog in 1993. While Feel was awaiting trial and free on bond, the case took another shocking turn. In 1995, after Feel had turned 18, he murdered his own brother. Feel ultimately pleaded guilty to both murders and received life imprisonment without parole. His case continued through the Illinois court system for years, including litigation connected to what his parents knew about his behavior before the first murder. Number 4, John Granat Jr. John Granat Jr. was 17 years old when his parents, John and Maria Granat, were murdered at their home in Palace Township in September 2011. Granat initially called 911 and reported finding his parents dead. Investigators soon began questioning his account. Granat and several friends were eventually charged in connection with the double murder. He was convicted of both killings and in 2017 was sentenced to natural life in prison.
Damn.
Number 3, David Biro. In 1990, 16-year-old David Biro, then a student at New Trier High School, murdered Nancy and Richard Langert inside their Winnetka home.
I know, B, straight
Nancy
up.
was pregnant at the time. The case became one of the Chicago suburbs' best-known murder cases and was later examined by programs including CBS's 48 Hours. Biro was convicted of the murders as well as the intentional homicide of Nancy's unborn child and received life imprisonment. Number 2, Eliza Wozni. Eliza Wozni was 16 years old when she murdered 34-year-old Uber driver Grant Nelson in Lincolnwood in May 2017. Wozni had summoned Nelson through the rideshare service shortly before the attack. The apparently random nature of the crime attracted national attention. She was charged as an adult with first-degree murder. In 2020, Wozni pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 27 years in prison. Number 1.
That's
Sarah
it?
Kolb. At number 1 is Sarah Kolb, one of the most widely known juvenile murder cases in Illinois history. Kolb was 16 years old when her classmate Adrienne Reynolds, also 16, was murdered in the Quad Cities area in January 2005. Another teenager, Corey Gregory, was also involved in the crime. Kolb's first trial ended with a deadlocked jury, but at her second trial, she was convicted of first-degree murder and concealment of a homicide.
Good.
She ultimately received an aggregate 53-year prison sentence. The Adrienne Reynolds case generated extensive national coverage and remains one of the most notorious Illinois murder cases involving teenage offenders.
Now, I'm going to say, I'm quite surprised. Yes, no King Von. I just knew that it was going to be some Negralises on that list. I am totally surprised. Yes, Flex, you got me there. I'm with you, brother. I just knew it was some quote-unquote serial killers in Chicago. I just knew. Turns out, not the case, huh? Interesting. You will be surprised, I must say. I didn't think that it was going to be a lot of black people in Louisiana like that, like it was too. But them dudes is cutting up down there in Louisiana. All right, so look, let's keep it rolling. I love these, man. This is what it do. 10 high-profile female inmates in New York City. New York City. Let's get it all the way in.
Prison system houses women connected to some of the state's most widely reported criminal cases.
What?
From nationally known murder trials to crimes that dominated New York headlines. Here are 10 high-profile female inmates currently serving sentences in New York. Joy Powell is a Rochester pastor and activist who became the focus of controversy following multiple criminal convictions. She received a lengthy prison sentence for burglary and assault, and was later convicted of second-degree murder in a separate case. Powell and her supporters have continued to challenge the circumstances surrounding her convictions, making her case unusually controversial. Tiona Rodriguez made national headlines in 2013 after authorities discovered that her newborn son had died. Prosecutors initially pursued more serious charges, but Rodriguez eventually pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter. In 2018, she was sentenced to 16 years in New York State Prison.
That's
Lauren
it.
Pacienza's case attracted major attention in New York City following the 2022 death of 87-year-old Broadway vocal coach Barbara Meyer Gustern. Prosecutors said Pacienza pushed
Lisa,
Gustern during an
thanks for
encounter
the
on a Manhattan
jewels.
sidewalk. Pacienza later pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter and received a sentence of 8.5 years in prison. Victoria Nasirova became known in the media as the Cheesecake Killer. Prosecutors said Nasirova attempted to poison a woman who closely resembled her before stealing identification and other belongings from the victim. A Queens jury convicted her of attempted murder, and in 2023 she was sentenced to 21 years behind bars. Laura Rideout was convicted in connection with the 2016 murder of her estranged husband, Craig Rideout, near Rochester. Prosecutors argued that she participated in a plan involving members of her family following a bitter separation and custody dispute. The case received national television coverage. Rideout was convicted of second-degree murder and received a sentence of 25 years to life. Ashley Wade was convicted in one of the Bronx's most disturbing and widely reported murder cases. In 2015, Wade killed her childhood friend, Angelique Sutton, who was pregnant at the time, and took Sutton's newborn baby. Wade was convicted of second-degree murder and kidnapping and received a sentence totaling 40 years to life. Nixelis Santiago was the mother of 7-year-old Nix Mary Brown, whose 2006 death became one of New York City's most notorious child abuse cases. The investigation exposed serious questions about whether authorities could have intervened earlier. Santiago was convicted of first-degree manslaughter and several related charges, and was sentenced to 43 years in prison. Jocelyn Ortega was working as a nanny for the Krim family in Manhattan when 2 children in her care, 6-year-old Lucia and 2-year-old Leo, were killed in 2012. The case shocked New York City and received extensive national coverage. Ortega was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lacey Spears was convicted in the 2014 death of her 5-year-old son,
crazy
Garnet.
as cat shit.
Prosecutors argued that Spears deliberately caused her son's medical problems while presenting herself online as the devoted mother of a seriously ill child. The case became one of America's most widely discussed examples of medical child abuse. Spears was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 20 years to life. Pamela Smart remains one of the most famous women incarcerated in New York.
What?
In 1990, Smart's husband, Greg Smart, was murdered inside the couple's New Hampshire home. Investigators eventually uncovered a plot involving Smart and several teenagers, including a teenage boy with whom she had formed an inappropriate relationship. Smart was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, accomplice to first-degree murder, and witness tampering. She received a mandatory sentence of life in prison without parole.
Damn, they getting it in. Up in New York. I'm flipping through the states, right?
On Georgia death row, all inmates on Pennsylvania death.
Okay, so look, let's Pennsylvania, cornfields, Amish. Who is the people on death row in Pennsylvania? Is there danger in Pennsylvania?
All inmates on Pennsylvania death row. As of August 2026, here are the crimes behind Pennsylvania's death sentences, presented alphabetically by last name. Devon Anderson was sentenced to death for murdering Kaylee Lyons, one of 3 victims connected to his case. Orlando Baez was sentenced to death for the 1987 murder of Janice Sissy Williams. Michael Ballard was sentenced to death for murdering his former girlfriend and 3 members of her family in 2010. Richard Baumhammers was sentenced to death after killing 5 people during a racially motivated crime spree in 2000. Herbert Blakeney was sentenced to death for murdering 14-month-old Basil Blakeney during a domestic confrontation. Arthur Bomar was sentenced to death for the 1996 murder of college athlete Amy Willard. Richard Boxley was sentenced to death for the 1997 murder of Jason Bolton in Reading. Dustin Briggs was sentenced to death for murdering sheriff's deputies Christopher Burgert and Michael Van Kuren in 2004. LeVar Brown was sentenced to death for murdering Michael Richardson, a cooperating witness in an earlier robbery case. Junius Burno was sentenced to death for murdering Carlos Huarbe and Oscar Rosado III during a robbery. Omar Sheriff Cash was sentenced to death for the 2008 murder of Muliek Brown in Philadelphia. Terry Ray Chamberlain was sentenced to death for murdering his estranged wife, Sherry.
Hold on. I'm noticing a pattern here. Now, when we talk about all the inmates, all the white people come up. Now that we talk about all the people that got killed, it's all the black people? What is going on here? Wait a minute. I'm noticing something. I'm going to have to go through a couple of these and see if my hypothesis is true.
And her boyfriend, Greg Inman. Jerry Chambers was sentenced to death for the murder of 3-year-old Portia Bennett. Jordan Clemens was sentenced to death for the 2012 murder of his estranged girlfriend, Carissa Kunko. Tador DeVito was sentenced to death for murdering his girlfriend, Angelina Taylor. Robert Diamond received death sentences for the murders of Angel Guadalupe and Reginald Woodson. Anthony Dick was sentenced to death for murdering his 2 young sons, Creed Vincent and James Dick.
Damn, yo,
Kevin Dowling was sentenced to death for the 1997 murder of Jennifer Myers. Troy Drumheller was sentenced to death for the murder of Carol Huttenstein. Stephen Duffy was sentenced to death for the 1984 murder of 19-year-old Kathy Kermchak. Stephen Edmiston was sentenced to death for the abduction and murder of 2-year-old Bobby Joe Matthew. John Eichinger received death sentences for murdering Heather Greaves, Lisa Greaves, and 3-year-old Avery. Henry Fahey was sentenced to death for the 1981 murder
you're
of
right.
12-year-old
A lot of them
Nicolette
is innocent.
Caserta. Leroy Fears was sentenced to death for the 1994 murder of 12-year-old Sean Hagan. Robert Floor was sentenced to death for murdering Newtown Borough Police Officer Brian Gregg in 2005. Eric Frayne was sentenced to death for the 2014 murder of Pennsylvania State Police Corporal Brian Dixon. Randy Haig was sentenced to death for arranging and participating in a contract killing tied to drugs and money. Kenneth Hairston was sentenced to death for murdering his wife Catherine and their 14-year-old son Sean. Patrick Haney was sentenced to death for the 2011 murder of 4-year-old Trenton St. Clair. Sheldon Hannibal was sentenced to death for the murder of Peter LaCourte. Francis Harris was sentenced to death for murdering Darrell Martin in Lancaster County. Thomas Hawkins Jr. was sentenced to death for murdering his 14-year-old niece, Andrea Thomas. Charles Hicks was sentenced to death for the 2008 murder of Deanna Null. George Hitcho Jr. was sentenced to death for murdering Freemansburg police officer Robert Lasso in 2011. Rahmael Holt was sentenced to death for murdering New Kensington police officer Brian Shaw in 2017.
Now, that's the first black dude out of the scene that murdered the police. I've been paying attention to that. If these dudes ain't getting the police out the box, I don't know what the hell is. What is going on in Pennsylvania? Ain't that where Philly is? The city of brotherly love? There's no brotherly love in Philly. Pennsylvania, none of that.
Robert Hughes received 2 death sentences for murdering 2 McDonald's employees during a 1989 robbery. Timothy Jacoby was sentenced to death for murdering Monica Schmeier during a robbery at her home. Christopher Johnson was sentenced to death for murdering Wildlife Conservation Officer David Grove in 2010. Harv Johnson was sentenced to death for the 2008 murder of 2-year-old Dorisabel Baez.
Another thing to consider, though, we've seen a lot of faces, right? A lot of people who got put to death for a death. So, like, for every person you see, like 1 to 2 to 3 to 5 people done died. This is a lot of people just getting out the box. This is crazy when you think about the magnitude and the scale, and like, is this going on at other places around the world? Now, I know other countries, they cut your hand off and public execution and all that, but it just seemed like we just offing a bunch of people.
Marcel Johnson was sentenced to death for murdering Ebony Talley and her 4-year-old daughter, R. Manny Rankins. Aaron Jones was sentenced to death for orchestrating the 1990 murder of Brian Kennedy as gang retaliation. Lewis Jordan was sentenced to death for murdering Philadelphia police officer Charles Cassidy during a 2007 robbery. Melvin Knight was sentenced to death for his role in the 2010 murder of Jennifer Doherty. John Kohler Jr. was sentenced to death for murdering his girlfriend and her 9-year-old son.
Damn.
Richard Laird was sentenced to death for the 1987 murder of Anthony Milano. John Lesko was sentenced to death for murdering Apollo police officer Leonard Miller during a multi-victim crime spree. George Lopez was sentenced to death for murdering David Belaski during a robbery. Glenn Lyons was sentenced to death for the 2008 murder of his co-worker, Kathy Liebig. Kevin Marinelli was sentenced to death for the 1994 murder of Conrad Dumchok. Jeffrey Martin was sentenced to death for the 2006 murder of 12-year-old Gabrielle Gabby Beshin. Lenwood Mason was sentenced to death for the 1994 murder of his girlfriend, Iona Jeffries. Kevin Madison was sentenced to death for murdering Christian Agosto during a 2008 robbery. Landon May received death sentences for murdering Terry and Lucy Smith during a 2001 robbery. Hubert Michael Jr. was sentenced to death for the murder of 16-year-old Trista Eng. Wayne Mitchell was sentenced to death for the 1997 murder of his estranged wife, Robin Little.
Now, I was trying to see if there's a pattern, like, do it gotta be 2? Do it gotta be 1? Pennsylvania ain't playing no games with your buttocks. They are getting you out the whole box. What you did? You did what? Oh no, you gotta go right now. Ain't no death row. They out the box.
Hector Morales was sentenced to death for murdering Ronald Simmons Jr., a witness in a federal drug case. Kevin Murphy was sentenced to death for murdering his mother Doris, sister Chris, and Aunt Edith Teach. Daniel Hattie was sentenced to death after murdering a witness who had identified him in a double homicide investigation. Miguel Padilla was sentenced to death for murdering Alfred Mignogna.
So man, they going too fast. My man's done killed Aunt Edith. This nigga done killed the person who saw him kill 2 other people. Damn. It's crazy out here, fam. You will get your ass whacked. Y'all better stop y'all better stop getting mad at folks at these traffic stops and all that road rage and jumping in front of people at the goddamn grocery store, man. They out here. Damn. I'm just saying.
Frederick Rickabaugh and Stephen Heiss in Altoona. Michael Parrish was sentenced to death for murdering his girlfriend, Victoria Adams, and their young son, Sidney. Maurice Patterson was sentenced to death for ordering the murder of Eric Sawyer, whom he believed was cooperating with police. Albert Perez was sentenced to death for murdering Ducheliz Diaz Santiago and her young daughter, Kayla. Ortella Philiston was sentenced to death for murdering Philadelphia police officer Robert Hayes during a 1993 traffic stop. Michael Pierce received 3 death sentences for murdering his mother, father, and grandmother.
Not granny!
Deliberately set fire. Richard Poplawski was sentenced to death for murdering Pittsburgh police officers Eric Kelly, Stephen Mayle, and Paul Shulo. Michael Pruitt was sentenced to death for the 2002 murder of Greta Googler in Berks County. Anthony Reed was sentenced to death after committing 2 gang-related murders 6 days apart in Philadelphia. Cletus Rivera was sentenced to death for murdering Reading police officer Scott Wirtz.
Cletus?
William Rivera was sentenced to death for a Philadelphia murder committed during a carjacking and robbery. Auntie Anne Robinson was sentenced to death for the 1996 murder of Rashawn Bass. Harvey Robinson was sentenced to death for murdering Jessica Jean Fortney, one of 3 people he killed. Christopher Roman was sentenced to death for murdering Philadelphia police officer Laretha Baird during a 1996 bank robbery.
Man, hold on, man. What is going on with the police in Pennsylvania? Okay? Why do the citizens got it out for these police in Pennsylvania? I mean, they knocking them out the box. What the hell is going on in Pennsylvania? This is crazy. And you think Pennsylvania is inconspicuous and shit. Like, what? And then the police ain't got a damn chance in Pennsylvania.
Alfonso Sanchez was sentenced to death following the 2007 murders of Lisa Diaz and Mendez Thomas. Michael Singley was sentenced to death for murdering Christine Rohrer and a neighbor who confronted him. John Small was sentenced to death for the 1981 murder of 17-year-old Cheryl Smith. Wayne Smith was sentenced to death for the murder of Eileen Jones. Ricky Smyrns was sentenced to death for his role in the 2010 murder of Jennifer Doherty. Mark Spots killed his brother and 3 women during a 2-day Pennsylvania murder spree in 1995. Ralph Stokes was sentenced to death for murdering 3 people during a restaurant robbery. Killed his brother and 3 women during...
He killed his brother and the 3 chicks. That sounded like a great time, bro. Damn, they going too fast with some of these. Jeez Louise. What the hell?
During a 2-day Pennsylvania murder spree in 1995, Ralph Stokes was sentenced to death for murdering 3 people during a restaurant robbery. Paul Taylor was sentenced to death after murdering his wife, 3 children, and mother-in-law. Don Tedford was sentenced to death for the 1986 murder of...
Not the kids and the mother-in-law. Oh, they was giving that man hell in that house. I hate to say it. His mother-in-law, his wife. I mean, he was probably stepdad. Them probably wasn't his kid. They was probably giving that man hell in that house. God, he took them all out to the upper room. Y'all going to the upper room.
22-year-old Janine Revac. Dante Thomas was sentenced to death for murdering prosecution witness Tyrese Gaiman in 2006. Leighton Thomas was sentenced to death for murdering Lisa Sheets and her 16-year-old daughter, Haley. Stephen Triber was sentenced to death for setting a house fire that killed his 2-year-old daughter, Jessica. Gerald Watkins was sentenced to death for murdering his girlfriend, their newborn daughter, and her 9-year-old son. Robert Wharton was sentenced to death for the 1984 murders of Bradley and Fernie Hart. Ernest Holiver Jr. was sentenced to death for murdering his estranged wife and their 2 daughters. Roy Williams was sentenced to death for the murder of James McDonnell, a stranger he encountered in Philadelphia. Auric Woodard was sentenced to death for the 2011 murder of 2-year-old Jacques Twin. William Wright III was sentenced to death for the 1998 murder of James Maury. Raghunandan Yandamuri was sentenced to death for murdering baby Sanvi Vena and her grandmother during a kidnapping for ransom plot.
Man, Pennsylvania is off the meat rackalypse. Gee, I ain't even know about Pennsylvania like that. I'm gonna keep it real with you. Bill, what up? Who that? KL, what up? KL, yay? Man, this is crazy. Lori, what up? Oh my gosh. So they got another one of them, y'all. I know that I know for one, I know it's gonna be I don't know. I have been surprised to see what I've been seeing so far. This is crazy. And talk about the dopamine hit. This rapid fire crime, I didn't ran up on the crime gold mine. This is it. God. All right, y'all, let's get Tennessee in the box. Let's see what Tennessee do on the death row side of the game.
Tennessee death row. Their cases span more than 4 decades, from murders committed in the early 1980s to a triple murder committed in 2021. These are all 42 inmates currently under a Tennessee death sentence and the crimes that put them there. John Bain was convicted of felony murder for the 1988 killing of Royce Frazier. Prosecutors proved that Frazier was murdered during a robbery. Bain's original death sentence was overturned, but a second jury again sentenced him to death. Andre Bland was sentenced to death for the 1992 murder of Untrain Sanders in Memphis. Sanders was killed during an attempted robbery, and Bland was ultimately convicted of first-degree murder and especially aggravated robbery. Kevin Burns was convicted of 2 felony murders committed during a 1992 robbery. The victims were Damon Dawson and Tracy Johnson. Burns received life imprisonment for Johnson's murder, but was sentenced to death for killing Dawson. Tony Carruthers was convicted of the 1994 kidnapping and murders of Marcellos Anderson, Frederick Tucker, and Deloy Anderson in Memphis. He received death sentences for the triple murder and remains condemned following a halted execution attempt in May 2026. Preston Carter, who has also used the name Akil Jahi, pleaded guilty to the felony murders of Thomas and Tensia Jackson. The couple was killed during an aggravated burglary in Shelby County in May 1993. Tyrone Chalmers was convicted of murdering Randy Allen in Memphis in August 1994. Allen was robbed during the crime, and Chalmers was convicted of felony murder and especially aggravated robbery before receiving a death sentence. Cedric Clayton received 3 death sentences for a 2012 triple murder in Memphis. Clayton killed his girlfriend, Bashea Fisher, along with Fisher's mother and father, following a confrontation at the family's home. Lamarcus Davidson was sentenced to death for the 2007 murders of Channon Christian and Christopher Newsom.
Now it's overwhelming at that point. What y'all got going on? What y'all got going on in Mississippi now? I mean, or in Tennessee now? Now I'm finna have to find the Tennessee inmate so I can prove my point. But come on now, everybody dying is black.
In Knoxville, the couple was kidnapped, SA, and murdered after being abducted during a carjacking. Davidson received death sentences for both murders. Jesse Dotson was convicted of one of Tennessee's largest multiple victim murder cases. In 2008, 6 people were murdered inside a Memphis home, including Dotson's brother, 2 young nephews, and 3 other adults. 3 additional children survived the attack. Sean Finnegan is one of the more recently sentenced Tennessee death row prisoners. He was convicted of kidnapping, SA, and murdering 35-year-old Jennifer Paxton in Oak Ridge in 2019. A jury sentenced Finnegan to death in 2024. John Hall was sentenced to death for murdering his estranged wife, Billie Jo Hall, in Madison County in 1994. Prosecutors established that Hall deliberately killed her following the breakdown of their marriage. William Hall was convicted alongside Derek Quintero for the 1988 murders of Buford and Myrtle Vester in Stewart County. The killings occurred after Hall and several other prisoners escaped from the Kentucky State Penitentiary. James Hawkins was convicted of murdering Charlene Gaither, his longtime girlfriend and the mother of his children, in Memphis in 2008. Hawkins was also convicted of offenses connected with attempting to conceal what had happened afterward. Kenneth Henderson was already an inmate at the Fayette County Jail when he planned an escape in 1997. During that escape, Henderson killed Deputy Tommy Bishop. He later pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to death. Henry Hodges was sentenced to death for the murder of telephone repairman Ronald Bassett during a robbery in Davidson County in 1990. Bassett had been working when Hodges encountered him and committed the robbery and murder. David Ivey received a death sentence for the 2001 murder of his former girlfriend, Lakeisha Thomas, in Memphis. A jury convicted Ivey of premeditated first-degree murder after prosecutors established that the killing was intentional. Nicholas Johnson was sentenced to death for murdering Bristol police officer Mark Vance in 2004. Vance had responded to a disturbance when he was killed. Johnson was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death in 2007. Henry Lee Jones was convicted of murdering Clarence and Lillian James, an elderly married couple in Bartlett, in 2003.
This nigga done killed
The
Clarence.
murders were committed during a robbery of the couple's home. Jones received a death sentence for each victim. David Jordan received 3 death sentences following a shooting at a Tennessee Department of Transportation office in Jackson in 2005. Jordan killed his estranged wife, Renee Jordan, and her co-workers, Jerry Hopper and David Gordon. David Keene.
Damn, that work boy, better watch out. Having them work boyfriends and girlfriends get your ass dealt with. He said, not my wife. I'm finna come up there on break and get it straight. Damn.
Was sentenced to death for the 1990 murder of Ashley Nicole Reed, the 8-year-old daughter of his girlfriend.
What?
Keene was also convicted of SA, the child before her death. Terry King has been under a death sentence since the 1980s. He was convicted of kidnapping, robbing, and murdering Diana K. Smith in Knox County in 1983. His felony murder conviction resulted in the death penalty. Larry McKay and Michael Sample were convicted of murdering 2 store employees during a 1981 armed robbery in Shelby County.
And let's just get this clear. It seemed like if you messing with a dude's girl, you just happen to working at the store when they need some money, or you gonna get robbed in Memphis. Like it's just bottom line with that. Like you better not mess with none of their girls, because they're smoking you over that. Over that Orange Mountain Poom Poom, they're smoking you. You're out the box.
McKay received death sentences for both killings and has been on Tennessee death row since February 1983. Donald Middlebrooks was sentenced to death for the 1987 kidnapping and murder of 14-year-old Carrick Majors in Nashville. Prosecutors presented the killing as a racially motivated attack. Middlebrooks was convicted of first-degree murder and aggravated kidnapping. Ershawn Miller was sentenced to death for murdering
Oh, I got somebody. What you say? You follow me over here from Facebook? Because I'll be over there giving y'all that business. Y'all see him, y'all? Young Eagle. I saw your racist comments on Facebook and figured you'd have a low IQ YT channel as well. Ah. Boy, I told you I'd be having them on Facebook going crazy. My boy had to come up. Well, slow your roll now. I'll let you say what you want to say over here. Just don't get too far out the pocket, boy. Or we have to put you down now. Daniel's son, thank you for the jewels, homeboy. Melissa's, I see you. These Facebook, man, when you be giving them that work, when you be saying that, they got to follow you. They got to see what you about. He like, oh, he's live right now. Let me go. But what is going on in Memphis, boy? They will give you the business, and I'm seeing a pattern. Boy, you do something in Memphis, you getting sentenced to death. That's what they're doing. That's just what it is.
24-year-old convenience store clerk Ahmad Dalai in Jackson in 2015. Dalai was killed during the robbery of the Bull Market store where he was working. Ferris Morris was convicted of murdering Erica Hurd and Charles Ragland in Madison County in 1994. He received life without parole for Ragland's murder.
Oh, okay. I gotta check retro out.
Murder of Hurd. Clarence Nesbitt was 19 when he murdered 20-year-old Miriam Cannon in her Memphis apartment in 1993. The two had been...
And let me just say this too. Boy, if you a female in Memphis, you better not be trying to cheat on your man. You and that nigga ain't gonna see the light of day no more. Unfortunately, they ain't playing about them women's down there.
In a relationship for approximately a month, Nesbitt was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Richard Odom was sentenced to death for the 1991 murder of 77-year-old Mina Ethel Johnson in Memphis.
Mina Ethel?
Johnson was S.A. and murdered in a parking garage.
Oh,
and Odom was convicted of first-degree murder. Krista Pike is Tennessee's only woman on death row. Pike was convicted of the 1995 murder of 19-year-old Job Corps student Colleen Slemmer. Pike and others lured Slemmer to an isolated location before the murder. Nathaniel Pipkin is Tennessee's newest death row prisoner. In 2021, he murdered his mother, Tracy McNeely, his brother Carson Pipkin, and his 11-year-old half-sister Kaylee Warren.
Damn!
He also attempted to kill his stepfather, who escaped and called police.
This boy was trying to get the whole lineage out the box. He ain't want no bloodline to succeed. He was trying to you a step, get his ass too. We cutting yours off too. Damn.
Pipkin was sentenced to death in August 2026. Corinio Pruitt was sentenced to death for the 2005 murder of 79-year-old Lawrence Guidros in Memphis. Guidros was attacked during a carjacking, and Pruitt was convicted of felony murder along with related offenses. Charles Rice was convicted of the 2000 murder of 13-year-old Emily Branch in Memphis. Branch had disappeared after leaving home, and Rice was subsequently convicted of her SA and murder and sentenced to death.
See, that's one of them questionable ones. Whenever it's the inconclusive one, see, he might have been one of them brothers that got that exoneration due to DNA evidence or something like that. You know what I'm saying? That's a questionable one.
Michael Rimmer was sentenced to death for murdering his former girlfriend, Richie Ellsworth, in 1997. Ellsworth disappeared while working at the Memphis Inn. Rimmer was convicted of her murder as well as aggravated robbery. Gregory Robinson was convicted in the 1997 kidnapping and murder of Vernon Green in Memphis.
Not Vernon!
Prosecutors argued that Robinson ordered and helped organize the gang-related killing, making him criminally responsible.
Vernon Green? Ain't that Ernest's brother? Damn, ain't nobody told me nothing.
Even though others participated directly, William Rogers was sentenced to death for the 1996 kidnapping, SA, and murder of 9-year-old Jackie Beard in Clarksville. Rogers had approached the child while pretending to be a police officer.
Damn.
Vincent Sims was convicted of murdering Forrest Smith during a 1996 burglary in Memphis. The jury found Sims guilty of premeditated first-degree murder as well as especially aggravated burglary and sentenced him to death. Jonathan Stevenson was sentenced to death for the murder of his wife, Lisa Stevenson. Prosecutors proved that the 1989 killing was part of a murder-for-hire plot that Stevenson helped arrange. Dennis Suttles received a death sentence for murdering his former girlfriend, Patricia Gale Rhodes, in Knoxville in 1996. The killing occurred outside a restaurant, and Suttles was subsequently convicted of first-degree murder.
Good.
Gary Sutton was sentenced to death for the 1992 murder of his friend Tommy Griffin in Blount County.
Damn.
Sutton and co-defendant James Dellinger were convicted
Not
together.
the friend.
Sutton had also been convicted of another murder involving Griffin's sister. Heck Tran was convicted of 3 murders
What
committed
about
during a
your
1987
friends?
robbery at a Memphis restaurant where he had previously worked. The victims were Arthur Lee, Kai Ying Chui, and Manyin Huang Li. Stephen Wiggins was sentenced to death for murdering Dixon County Sheriff Sergeant Daniel Baker in 2018. Baker had stopped a stolen vehicle being driven by Wiggins when the encounter turned deadly. Wiggins received 2 death sentences. Howard Willis was convicted of murdering teenage newlyweds Adam Christmer and Samantha Lemon Christmer
not the
in 2002.
newlyweds.
Willis knew the young couple, and a Washington County jury eventually convicted him of both murders and imposed 2 death sentences.
And you couldn't get them no wedding gift, or that's how you reward them for getting married, you scumbag. Jeez Louise. You done took them, you done dropped them out the box. Damn, Tennessee cold in the mug, y'all. I ain't even gonna lie, man. I ain't even gonna lie to you. Tennessee cold. Cold-blooded. Tennessee is cold-blooded, brother. All right, well, let's swing it all the way back. Y'all already know this one gonna be good. It's always something popping off in Florida. So let's see what the teens do in Florida then.
10 teens convicted of murder. In Florida, Florida has seen some of the most disturbing juvenile murder cases in American history. Some received decades behind bars.
All right, let me
while
find
others were originally sentenced to spend the rest of their lives in prison. Here are 10 teens convicted of murder in Florida. Number 10, Morgan Leopard. Morgan Leopard was just 15 years old when 66-year-old James Stewart was murdered in Putnam County in 2008. Prosecutors said Leopard and her adult boyfriend, Toby Lowry, were responsible for the killing. Leopard was convicted of first-degree murder, robbery with a deadly weapon, and burglary. She originally received life without parole, although her sentence was later reconsidered because she had been a juvenile at the time of the crime. Number 9. Crystal
That's one of your favorite sayings,
Crystal
Lloyd.
Maestas was 16 when she became involved in the 1999 murder of Cordell Richards in Okaloosa County.
Jay, what up?
Maestas was prosecuted as an adult and convicted of first-degree felony murder and armed kidnapping. She initially received consecutive life sentences. Her case would later become part of Florida's changing legal landscape surrounding life sentences imposed on juveniles.
Damn.
Number 8, Amber Wright. In 2011, 15-year-old Amber Wright became involved in the murder of fellow teenager Seth Jackson in Marion County. Wright was convicted of first-degree murder. Her original conviction was overturned because of issues involving her police interrogation, but prosecutors tried her again. In 2016, she was convicted for a second time and sentenced to life in prison under Florida's juvenile sentencing rules.
Damn.
Number 7, Courtney Schulhoff. Courtney Schulhoff was 16 when her father, Stephen Schulhoff, was murdered in Altamonte Springs in 2004. Prosecutors accused Courtney and her boyfriend of planning the killing. In 2006, she was convicted of first-degree murder and initially sentenced to life without parole. Following major changes in juvenile sentencing law, she was eventually resentenced to 40 years in prison. Number 6. Nathaniel Brazil. Nathaniel Brazil was only 13 years old when teacher Barry Grunow was killed at Lake Worth Middle School in 2000. Brazil was prosecuted as an adult, but was ultimately convicted of second-degree murder rather than first-degree murder. He received a 28-year prison sentence followed by probation. Number 5. Valessa Robinson. Valessa Robinson was 15 when her mother, Vicki Robinson, was murdered in Tampa in 1998. Although prosecutors pursued a first-degree murder case, the jury convicted Valessa of third-degree murder. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison and was released in 2013 after serving roughly 15 years. Number 4. Rod Farrell. Rod Farrell was 16 when Richard Wendorf and Naoma Queen were murdered in Eustis in 1996. Farrell pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder and was originally sentenced to death. Because he had been a juvenile at the time of the killings, the Florida Supreme Court later ruled that his death sentence could not stand. His punishment was reduced to life imprisonment. Number 3. Joshua Phillips. Joshua Phillips was 14 years old when 8-year-old Maddie Clifton disappeared in Jacksonville in 1998. Phillips was later arrested and convicted of first-degree murder. He initially received a mandatory life without parole sentence. After the U.S. Supreme Court changed the rules surrounding mandatory life sentences for juveniles, Phillips was resentenced to life with the possibility of a future judicial review. Number 2. Michael Hernandez. Michael Hernandez was 14 when his classmate, 14-year-old Jaime Gove, was murdered at their Miami area school in 2004. Hernandez was tried as an adult and convicted of first-degree murder and attempted first-degree murder in 2008. He initially received life without parole.
Damn.
His sentence was later revisited because of changes in juvenile sentencing law. Hernandez died in a Florida prison in 2021 at the age of 31. Number 1. Aiden Fucci. Aiden Fucci was 14
Not Fucci.
when 13-year-old Tristan Bailey was murdered in St. Johns County in 2021. The case received national attention and Fucci was charged as an adult with first-degree murder. In 2023, shortly before his trial was scheduled to begin, he pleaded guilty. Fucci was sentenced to life in prison, with Florida law allowing his sentence to be reviewed after 25 years because he was a juvenile at the time of the crime.
Damn, Florida. I couldn't get. I was looking for Maryland. I'm gonna still find it, but I can get you close though. Let's see what's going down in Virginia. Let's see if Virginia body.
Inmates currently in Virginia prisons. Virginia abolished the death penalty in 2021, but its prison system still houses some of the most widely recognized convicted killers in the country. From nationally publicized campus cases to crimes that remained unsolved for years, these inmates are serving sentences ranging from decades behind bars to multiple life terms. Here are 10 notorious inmates currently held within the Virginia Department of Corrections. Number 10. Wesley Hadsell. Wesley Hadsell was convicted of murdering his 18-year-old stepdaughter, Angelica A.J. Hadsell, who disappeared from Norfolk in 2015. The case remained unresolved for years before Hadsell was brought to trial. In 2022, he was convicted of first-degree murder, concealing a body, and possessing illegal substances. A Virginia judge sentenced him to life in prison, plus an additional 15 years. Number 9. Natalie Keepers. Natalie Keepers was a Virginia Tech student when she became involved in the 2016 murder of 13-year-old Nicole Lovell. Prosecutors said Keepers helped plan the crime with fellow student David Eisenhower and later assisted in concealing what had happened. A jury convicted Keepers of being an accessory before the fact to first-degree murder. In November 2018, she was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Number 8. David Eisenhower. David Eisenhower was also a Virginia Tech student when Nicole Lovell disappeared from her home in Blacksburg. Investigators determined that Eisenhower had communicated with Nicole before arranging to meet her. He later entered no contest pleas to charges including first-degree murder, abduction, and concealing a body. Eisenhower received a total sentence of 75 years, with 25 years suspended, leaving him with 50 years to serve. Number 7. Randy Allen Taylor. In 2013, 17-year-old Alexis Murphy disappeared after leaving her home in Nelson County. Although her remains had not yet been located, prosecutors built a case against Randy Allen Taylor using surveillance footage, forensic evidence, and items recovered during the investigation. Taylor was convicted of murder and abduction in 2014 and received 2 life sentences. Alexis's remains were finally located in 2020, more than 7 years after she disappeared. Number 6, George Hughley V. George Hughley and Yeardley Love were both lacrosse players at the University of Virginia. In May 2010, Love was found unresponsive inside her Charlottesville apartment. Hughley, who had previously been in a relationship with her, was arrested later that day. A jury convicted him of second-degree murder and grand larceny. He was sentenced to 23 years in prison and is currently scheduled for release in 2030.
He about to get out.
Christopher Darnell Jones Jr. Christopher Darnell
Not
Jones Jr. was responsible for one of the darkest events in the University of Virginia's recent history. In November 2022, Jones opened fire aboard a bus returning to campus from a class trip. 3 UVA football players, Devin Chandler, Lavelle Davis Jr., and Deshaun Perry, were killed, while 2 other students were wounded. Jones pleaded guilty and, in November 2025, received 5 life sentences plus 23 years, the maximum punishment available under the plea agreement. Number 4. Monty Ralph Rissell. Monty Rissell is one of Virginia's longest incarcerated serial killers. During the 1970s, while still a teenager, Rissell committed a series of murders in the Alexandria area. He eventually admitted responsibility for killing 5 women. In 1977, at only 18 years old, Rissell was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms. He became eligible for parole years later, but has repeatedly been denied release. Number 3. Charles Severance. For more than a decade, 3 seemingly separate murders created fear and uncertainty throughout Alexandria. Charles Severance was ultimately charged with killing Nancy Dunning in 2003, Ronald Kirby in 2013, and Ruth Ann Lodato in 2014. Prosecutors connected the cases through evidence that included witness accounts, surveillance recordings, and firearms analysis. Severance was convicted and sentenced to 3 life terms, along with additional prison time. Number 2. Jesse Leroy Matthew Jr. Jesse Matthew was convicted in 2 of Virginia's most heavily publicized missing person cases. Virginia Tech student Morgan Harrington disappeared after attending a concert in Charlottesville in 2009. 5 years later, University of Virginia student Hannah Graham disappeared after leaving Charlottesville's downtown area. Evidence connected Matthew to both cases. In 2016, he pleaded guilty to abducting and murdering Harrington and Graham and received 4 consecutive life sentences. In March 2026, Matthew was transferred from the Supermax Red Onion State Prison to Keene Mountain Correctional Center. Number 1. Lee Boyd Malvo. At number 1 is Lee Boyd Malvo, the surviving participant in the 2002 DC area sniper attacks. Malvo was 17 when he and John Allen Muhammad carried out a series of shootings that created widespread fear across Virginia,
did they shoot
Maryland,
and how
and
many they
Washington,
killed,
DC.
though?
Malvo was convicted and received multiple life sentences in both Virginia and Maryland. Because he was a juvenile at the time, later changes in sentencing law made him eligible for parole consideration in Virginia, but his request was denied. Malvo remains in Virginia custody and was transferred from Red Onion State Prison to Keene Mountain Correctional Center in 2024. His Maryland sentences remain unresolved, pending resentencing proceedings.
Oh, he ain't never getting out. He's a done deal then. He's out of there. He is out of there. No, I heard y'all though. Okay, that's cool. No, it's no big deal. We all family, man. You know, if it ain't right, you at liberty to say I'm doing this for y'all. Y'all Gucci, no disrespect. Y'all good. Anyway, let's go. Let's go to a off-brand state. Let's do Oregon. I'm still looking for some good ones, but let's go Oregon. Let's see if they bat it out in Oregon. Let's see who cutting up down in Oregon.
In this video, we will cover 10 notorious inmates in Oregon. Randall Woodfield, the I-5 killer. A former draft pick for the Green Bay Packers serving life plus 90 years. He was convicted of multiple murders in SA along the Interstate 5 corridor during the early 1980s.
Damn.
Though authorities link him to up to 44 deaths. Hunter Jesperson, the happy face killer. A former long-haul truck driver serving multiple consecutive life sentences at the Oregon State Penitentiary. He was convicted of murdering 8 women in the early 1990s.
Damn, 8?
And earned his moniker by signing confessions to journalists with smiley faces. Kipland Kip Kinkle, serving a 111-year sentence without the possibility of parole at the Oregon State Correctional Institution. In 1998, at 15 years old, Kinkle murdered his parents before carrying out a mass shooting at Thurston High School in Springfield, killing 2 students and injuring 25 others.
Damn.
Christian Longo, a former high-profile fugitive who was captured in Mexico after murdering his wife and 3 young children on the Oregon coast in 2001. Formerly on death row, his sentence was commuted to life without parole. Dayton Leroy Rogers, the Malala Forest killer, convicted of the systematic torture and murder of 7 women in the 1980s.
Wow.
Following the dismantling of death row, his 5 death sentences were overturned, and he was officially resentenced to 6 consecutive life terms without parole. Bradley Morris Cunningham, serving a life sentence at the Oregon State Penitentiary for the brutal 1990 bludgeoning murder of his ex-wife, Cheryl Keaton. The high-profile case and subsequent trial became the subject of true crime author Ann Rule's best-selling book, Dead by Sunset. Richard Lawrence Marquette, one of Oregon's oldest inmates. Marquette was sentenced to life in 1975 for a series of grisly dismemberment murders targeting 3 Portland area women. He holds historical notoriety as the first ever 11th name added to the FBI's 10 most wanted list. Bruce and Joshua Turnage, a father and son team serving permanent life terms without parole for orchestrating the 2008 Woodburn bank bombing. Motivated by anti-government ideologies, they planted a device that killed 2 law enforcement officers and severely injured a third, Randy Lee Guzek, convicted of the horrific 1987 double murder of a Central Oregon couple during a home robbery. Guzek achieved unique legal notoriety for having his death sentence overturned by appeals courts a record 4 times before his sentence was permanently altered to life. Ward Weaver III, serving consecutive life sentences for the highly publicized 2002 kidnapping, SA, and murder of 2 teenage girls in Oregon City.
Damn.
Authorities recovered the victims' bodies buried on Weaver's residential property.
Damn. Well, I mean, I guess
in this video,
I would say Oregon right now, because Oregon was really short. Now, you know, that doesn't obviously mean that they have any more, any less than any other state, but as far as high profiles go and this type of content, that was like the shortest one so far.
The 10 states,
that was
10 most dangerous states.
That was it. That's the shortest one.
10 most prolific modern 10 killers, 10 notorious.
So I got a couple more.
Death row across the United States. Hundreds of some prisons.
I got a couple more.
Someone be convicted of murder when some murder.
You know what I'm saying? So that
every major. This video will
we can close out strong.
In 2010.
Oh yeah.
This video will cover.
Now while we watching criminals and seeing who doing what, let's see. I thought this was interesting for real. Let's see who to survive the most solitary confinement. Like being locked up with nobody seeing you.
For 10 inmates who spent years in solitary confinement. Number 10, Ian Manuel. Ian Manuel entered prison as a teenager after being convicted of armed robbery. Over the years, he spent roughly 18 years in solitary confinement under highly restrictive conditions. He later described how isolation changed his perception of time. Without normal social interaction, days blended into weeks, and weeks into years. To keep his mind active, he read constantly and wrote letters whenever he could. His story reminds us that surviving solitary confinement is only the beginning. Recovering from it can take years. Number 9, Jack Henry Abbott. Jack Henry Abbott spent much of his life in prison. including extended periods in solitary confinement. Instead of allowing isolation to silence him, Abbott began writing. His letters vividly described prison life, loneliness, and the psychological effects of prolonged isolation. Those writings eventually reached the outside world and became a best-selling book called In the Belly of the Beast. Although Abbott's life after release ended in tragedy, his first-hand descriptions of solitary confinement remain among the most widely discussed accounts ever written by a prisoner. Number 8. Mumia Abu-Jamal, former journalist. Mumia Abu-Jamal spent decades on Pennsylvania's death row.
Oh, that's
While death row
Mumia.
conditions vary from state to state and are not always the same as solitary confinement, many inmates experience severe isolation under highly restrictive housing. His imprisonment attracted worldwide attention and generated decades of
Free
legal
Mumia.
appeals and public debate.
I did a
Supporters
show about
questioned
him.
the fairness of his conviction, while others defended it. Regardless of where people stand on the case, his long years under restrictive confinement became part of the larger discussion about the effects of prolonged isolation. Number 7. Hugo Pinnell. Hugo Pinnell spent decades in California's prison system. For much of that time, he lived in solitary or other highly restrictive housing. Supporters argued that his isolation had become excessive after so many years. Prison officials maintained that security concerns justified the restrictions.
Tammy,
His case
thanks for the
highlighted one of
jewels.
the biggest questions surrounding solitary confinement. At what point does isolation stop being
Kevin
a security
Bacon, I
measure
don't know.
and become a punishment in itself? Number 6. Robert King. Robert King was one of the 3 prisoners who later became known as the Angola Three. He spent approximately 29 years in solitary
Damn.
confinement at Louisiana State Penitentiary. During those years, King developed strict daily routines to help preserve his mental health. Exercise, reading, writing, anything to give structure to days that otherwise felt endless. After his release, he dedicated much of his life to speaking publicly about the human cost of prolonged isolation. Number 5. Herman Wallace. Herman Wallace spent more than 40 years in solitary confinement
Damn.
as part of the Angola Three. His conviction was challenged for years through the courts. In 2013, a federal judge overturned that conviction. Wallace was released, but only days before he died from liver cancer. His
Well,
case
shout out to
became one of the
Pops,
most
little
widely
Southern
cited
patriot.
examples in debates over long-term solitary confinement in the United States. Number 4. Thomas Silverstein. Thomas Silverstein
Somebody
spent
mentioned him in
approximately
the
36
chat.
years in near total isolation inside the federal prison system. After multiple murders committed while incarcerated, officials placed him under one of the strictest control measures ever used in an American prison. He spent nearly every day alone in a specially designed
thinking
cell
that's
with
too
extremely limited
inhumane,
human
Lori.
contact. Supporters of these restrictions argued they were necessary for the safety of staff and other inmates. Critics questioned whether decades of isolation carried psychological costs that extended beyond its security benefits. Silverstein's case remains one of the most extreme examples of long-term segregation in U.S. prison history. Number 3. Leonard Peltier. Leonard Peltier spent decades in federal prison before his sentence was commuted in 2025. During his incarceration, he experienced extended periods of restrictive housing, though not continuous solitary confinement for decades. His imprisonment became internationally known because of the ongoing legal and political controversy surrounding his conviction. His case demonstrates that even when inmates are not continuously held in solitary or repeated periods of isolation, can become part of a much longer prison experience. Number 2. Albert Woodfox. Albert Woodfox spent nearly 44 years in solitary confinement
What?
as part of the Angola Three. That extraordinary length of time is among the longest well-documented periods of continuous solitary confinement in American history. Woodfox consistently maintained his innocence. Over the years, his conviction was reviewed multiple times through the courts. In 2016, after decades of legal battles, he accepted a plea agreement that allowed him to leave prison. Following his release, he wrote about the importance of maintaining hope despite decades of isolation. His story has become one of the
Wow.
best-known examples in discussions about solitary confinement. Number 1. The Angola Three, Albert Woodfox, Herman Wallace, and Robert King, are collectively remembered as the Angola Three. Together, they spent well over 100 years in solitary confinement. Their cases drew international attention from journalists,
That's
legal experts,
just wrong.
and human rights organizations. Many advocates argue that prolonged solitary confinement can have severe psychological effects, especially when it continues for years. Correctional officials have often responded that segregation can be necessary to protect inmates, prison staff, and overall institutional security in certain high-risk situations. The debate continues today. What is clear is that the Angola 3 fundamentally changed public awareness of solitary confinement in America. Their stories remain central to conversations about prison reform, human rights, and the limits of isolation as a correctional practice.
Damn. Some of that's just wrong. I can understand going to jail, but God, let the boy out. Come on. Do they get visitation in solitary confinement? Like, and then if the cell is whack, just imagine what solitary is like. Somebody mentioned North Carolina in the chat. So let's see what the most notorious inmates on North Carolina's death row be about. This ought to be interesting.
It's on death row. In this video, we are going to look at 10 of the most notorious. Henry Louis Wallace, dubbed the Taco Bell Strangler, Wallace is the state's most prolific serial killer. He was sentenced to death in 1997 for the brutal murders of 11 young women in the Charlotte area over a 22-month span. Blanche Taylor Moore, one of only 2 women on the state's death row. Moore is North Carolina's most famous serial poisoner. Convicted in 1990 for killing her boyfriend using arsenic, she was also accused of poisoning her husband, her father, and another boyfriend. She is 93 years old. Mario Andretta McNeil. McNeil was sentenced to death in 2013 for the highly publicized kidnapping and murder of 5-year-old Shania Davis in Fayetteville. The horrific nature of the case gripped national media and resulted in the state Supreme Court upholding his capital execution status. Jerry Connor, convicted and sentenced in 1990. Connor remains on death row for a highly publicized double homicide in Gates County, where he attacked and murdered a convenience store worker and her mother. Wayne Allen Laws, sentenced in 1985 for killing 2 men with a claw hammer in Davidson County. Laws has been waiting on the state's death row longer than any other active inmate. Arlette Parker, alongside Blanche Moore. Parker is one of only 2 women on North Carolina's death row. She was sentenced to death in 1999 for first-degree kidnapping and the drowning murder of an 86-year-old woman she was caring for. Michael J. Braxton. Braxton is an active death row inmate who gained recent notoriety by recording a hip-hop track called Live on Death Row and co-authoring a book about life inside prison. He was sentenced to death in 1996 for killing a fellow inmate while already serving life sentences for other homicides. Andrew Ramsier. On May 24, 2007, 19-year-old Ramsier committed an armed robbery at a convenience store/gas station in Statesville, North Carolina. During the robbery, he shot and killed 2 people, store clerk Jennifer Vincek and customer Jeffrey Peck. The entire incident was captured on the store's security surveillance cameras. Yaga Edward Gillard, convicted of a horrific 2016 double homicide, human trafficking, and SA at a Raleigh motel. His death sentence was officially reviewed and upheld by the North Carolina Supreme Court. Jonathan Richardson, sentenced to death in 2010 for the brutal 2006 kidnapping, SA, and murder of 4-year-old Tiani Vance in Johnston County.
Damn, that was...
North Carolina has over 120 inmates on death.
North Carolina was kind of short. Somebody said we just did a Pennsylvania. I forgot which one that was. I don't know if that was the inmates or the death row, but them death row ones. Hold on, let me see if I can't find us another one of them death rows, because them death rows was like, whoa, that's like the worst of the worst. Death row. Let me see what we got here. Oh, we didn't see what's up. Talk about an off-brand one for real. We didn't see what's up with Oklahoma. It's like a state you just forget about Oklahoma, don't you? Like, dang, there's a state, Oklahoma. Yeah, there's an Oklahoma, Tulsa, all that. Check it out.
Oklahoma currently lists 25 people on its death row roster. This is not a ranking. The names follow the state's official list.
I'll look for them.
Each person was convicted in court, and this summary focuses on the crime that resulted in the death sentence. Joseph Fidel Alaniez was sentenced to death for the 2018 murder of Brittany Young at an apartment complex in Norman. Brenda Evers Andrew was convicted of arranging the 2001 murder of her estranged husband, Bob Andrew. Prosecutors said she planned the killing with James Pavat, partly to collect life insurance money. Miles Sterling Bench received a death sentence for murdering 16-year-old Braylee Henry in 2012.
Damn.
Henry disappeared after stopping at the convenience store where Bench worked. Sean Michael Bosey was convicted of the 2010 murders of Katrina Griffin and her two children, Christian and Chastity. He was also convicted of setting fire to the family's home. Ronson Kyle Bush was sentenced to death for the 2008 murder of Billy Harrington inside Harrington's Oklahoma City home. Carlos Cuesta Rodriguez was convicted of murdering his girlfriend, Olympia Fisher, in 2003. His death sentence followed a Cleveland County trial. Dustin Melton Davison was sentenced to death for murdering 2-year-old Creedon Brooks, the young son of Davison's former girlfriend. Daryl Wayne Frederick received the death penalty for the 2011 murder of his mother, Connie Frederick, at her home in Oklahoma County. Ronnie Eugene Fuston was convicted of murdering Michael Rhodes in 2012. Rhodes was with his 3-year-old child when the shooting occurred. Clarence Roselle Good Jr. was sentenced to death for 3 murders committed in Owasso in 2005. The victims were Mitch Thompson, Tara Burchett Thompson, and Tara's 10-year-old daughter, Kayla. Marlon Dion Harmon was convicted of killing convenience store owner Kamal Choudhury during a 2004 robbery in Oklahoma City. Donnie Lee Harris Jr. received a death sentence for the 2012 murder of his girlfriend, Christy Ferguson, during an arson attack at her home. Derek Terrell Leday was sentenced to death for the 2015 murder of Dennis Johnson Jr. Prosecutors said Johnson was killed in Oklahoma City before his body was moved to Pontotoc County. Wade Greeley Lay was convicted of killing bank security guard Kenneth Anderson during a failed Tulsa bank robbery in 2004. Wow. Lay committed the robbery with his son. Ricky Ray Malone was sentenced to death for the 2003 murder of Oklahoma Highway Patrol trooper Nick Green during a traffic stop. Micah Alexander Martinez received 2 death sentences for the 2009 murders of Carl and Martha Miller inside their home near Cache, Oklahoma. Alfred Brian Mitchell was convicted of the 1991 murder of Elaine Scott at an Oklahoma City recreation center. The attack also resulted in robbery and SA convictions. Alton Alexander Nolan was sentenced to death for murdering co-worker Colleen Hufford during a 2014 workplace attack at Vaughn Foods in Moore. Another employee survived the attack. James Dwight Pavat was convicted alongside Brenda Andrew in the 2001 murder of Rob Andrew. Prosecutors said Pavat helped plan and carry out the insurance-related killing. Derek Don Posey received 2 death sentences for the 2013 murders of Amy Gibbons and her 5-year-old son, Briar. The crimes occurred during an attack and fire at their home. William Lewis Reese was sentenced to death in Oklahoma for the 1997 murder of 19-year-old Tiffany Johnston. The case remained unsolved for years before Reese confessed in 2016.
Hey, real quick, you know what's crazy about seeing these though? You know how you always hear about statistics and they just, we so desensitized to death, but it's crazy to see how many people actually take it to that point. Like, you get to put the face with the name, so to speak. Like, oh my God, dude, you're a murderer. Not only did you murder one person, you did like 2 or 3, man. Like, gosh.
James C. Ryder was convicted of murdering Daisy and Sam Hallam in 1999. He received a death sentence for Daisy's murder and life without parole for Sam's. Isaiah Glendale Tryon was sentenced to death for the 2012 murder of his former girlfriend, Tia Bloomer, at an Oklahoma City bus station. Daniel Raul Santiago Vasquez received
And I think it got to be something said, man, for these crash out dudes over these women. I mean, it's every other one somebody that crashed out over their female girlfriend. Then I noticed if it's a black dude, it's the girlfriend. If it's a white dude, it's the wife and kids or the mom and dad, which is crazy. Like they'll get the wife and the mom and dad or the mother-in-law too. All y'all gotta go. He just and with the dudes though, it'd be the mother and the son, which is even. It's all terrible. But I'm just saying, these dudes crashing out over these females is whack.
2 death sentences for the 2018 murders of 23-year-old Shalia Toombs and her unborn son. Toombs was approximately 8 months pregnant.
Another one.
Finally, David Ware was sentenced to death for murdering Tulsa Police Sergeant Craig Johnson during a 2020 traffic stop.
Also, it can be said in every state we see it's always somebody to get with them police too. They be thinking they tough, and we all see that it's somebody way tougher than them in every state.
Officer Orish Zarkashan was also seriously wounded, but survived.
Damn, Oklahoma was kind of short.
Oklahoma.
Somebody said New Mexico. That's kind of off brandy. Let's see how they getting it in New Mexico. Is they bad it in New Mexico?
New Mexico abolished the death penalty in 2009, but these 10 men will never leave prison. Here are the most notorious inmates currently inside NMC. In 2013, 15-year-old Nehemiah Griego shocked the nation by murdering his parents and 3 younger siblings.
Damn.
After a lengthy legal battle over his rehabilitation, he is serving 3 concurrent life terms, moving past his 2022 state Supreme Court appeal failure. Griego marks another year of adult state prison confinement in 2026. Damian Herrera carried out a brutal 2017 shooting spree, killing 5 people, including his mother. He remains under 24-hour maximum security following a violent, caught-on-camera jailbreak attempt. Just recently, the New Mexico Supreme Court formally upheld his consecutive life sentences, solidifying his permanent status behind bars. Sentenced to 2 concurrent life terms plus 40 consecutive years for the horrific 2017 Clovis Library mass shooting, Nathaniel Jouette remains heavily monitored. While recent state juvenile sentencing overhauls have sparked intense debate regarding future parole eligibility for young offenders, Jouette continues to serve out his strict maximum security designation. Robert Fry is one of the most feared serial killers in New Mexico history. Convicted of the gruesome 2000 murder of mother of 5 Betty Lee, Fry was later tied to 3 other brutal killings in San Juan County.
Not the gruesome.
He spent nearly 20 years on death row until a landmark state Supreme Court decision officially commuted his sentence to permanent life imprisonment without the possibility of release, long before hitting federal radar. Roy Paul Martinez was a feared name across the New Mexico prison system. As a ruthless leader within the Sindicato de Nuevo Mexico gang network, Martinez orchestrated widespread narcotics trafficking and brutal cell block assaults. Convicted under sweeping federal racketeering laws, he continues to serve out a life sentence under strict, high-security confinement. Christopher Dominguez was a career thief who graduated to high-stakes violence. He led law enforcement on a multi-state rampage involving armed pharmacy robberies, hostage-taking, and violent shootouts across state lines. He remains locked away under heavy security for his 28-year sentence. Inmate violence isn't just external. Cody Ruiz became one of the most heavily monitored inmates in the state after orchestrating a brutal coordinated ambush on correction staff in Las Cruces, which left an officer with a broken jaw and proved how volatile state facilities can be. Joseph Blais is one of the most notorious predators in Albuquerque history. Blais targeted and attacked young girls throughout the 1980s and 90s, remaining unidentified until a landmark 2010 DNA match. Handed a crushing 90-year sentence, Blais continues to face intense public scrutiny behind bars as a prime, uncharged suspect in the infamous 2009 West Mesa serial murders. Anthony Ray Baca, known as Preacher, sat at the absolute apex of the S&M prison gang. From behind bars, he controlled drug pipelines and ordered executions on rival inmates and high-ranking prison officials alike. He serves his life sentence under the highest federal state safety restrictions. Finally, Michael Paul Astorga. In 2006, Astorga triggered a massive international manhunt and landed on the FBI's most wanted list after shooting and killing Bernalillo County Deputy James McGrain Jr. during a traffic stop. Convicted of first-degree murder, Astorga narrowly escaped the death penalty. Today, he remains heavily locked away, serving a minimum 60-year stretch.
Ooh.
This video will cover 10 of the most notorious inmates.
Did somebody... Everybody been saying California. I think we did California. We did California. Yeah. We did California because I think Suge Knight was in the California joint. And it's pretty much the most notorious in California. We did California. Let me see what we got here. Somebody said West Virginia. That's pretty off-brand too. Somebody said West Virginia. Somebody said North Dakota. I think we did North Dakota too. Let me see what I got good. Okay. This should round us off real nice. Let's go to Washington. Let's see what's popping in Washington. Yeah, they got a Utah. I actually see it was something somebody said that I didn't even see. Texas, they got one for Texas. But let's check the Washington out. The most notorious in Washington. Okay. Let's check it on out.
Inmates in Washington state prisons. Washington's prison system houses some of the most infamous convicted killers in American history. From serial murderers to perpetrators of crimes that shocked the entire state. Here are 10 notorious inmates currently serving sentences under the Washington Department of Corrections. Number 10, David Lewis Rice. On Christmas Eve, in 1985, Rice entered the Seattle home of attorney Charles Goldmark and killed Goldmark, his wife Annie, and their 2 children. Rice mistakenly believed the family was connected to a political conspiracy. His original death sentence was overturned, and he is now serving life in prison. Number 9, Warren Leslie Forrest. Forrest has been incarcerated since his conviction for the 1974 murder of Krista K. Blake.
Damn.
Decades later, DNA evidence connected him to the murder of 17-year-old Martha Morrison.
Damn.
He was convicted of that second killing in 2023 and remains suspected in several other unsolved cases. Number 8, Connor Michael Shearman. Shearman was convicted of killing 4 members of the Milken family in Kirkland in 2006 and setting their home on fire. He was originally sentenced to death, but that sentence became life without parole after Washington's death penalty was declared unconstitutional. Number 7, Byron Eugene Scherf. Scherf was already serving life without parole when he killed correctional officer Jamie Biendel at the Monroe Correctional Complex in 2011. His death sentence was later vacated and replaced with another life without parole sentence. Number 6, Michelle Anderson. On Christmas Eve in 2007, Anderson and her boyfriend murdered 6 members of Anderson's family near Carnation, Washington. The victims included 3 generations of the same family. Anderson received 6 consecutive life sentences without parole.
Damn.
Number 5, Joseph McEnroe. McEnroe was Anderson's co-defendant in the Carnation killings. A jury convicted him of murdering all 6 family members, but rejected the death penalty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 4, Jack Owen Spillman III. Sometimes called the Werewolf Butcher, Spillman admitted to 3 Washington murders committed during 1994 and 1995. He pleaded guilty to 3 counts of aggravated first-degree murder and was sentenced to life without parole. Number 3, Donna Perry Perry was convicted of murdering Yolanda Sapp Nikki Lowe, and Kathleen Brisbois near Spokane in 1990. Advances in forensic evidence helped investigators connect Perry to the decades-old cases. In 2017, she received 3 life sentences without parole. Number 2, Robert Lee Yates Jr. Known as the Spokane serial killer, Yates was convicted of killing 15 people. He received more than 400 years for 13 murders and was sentenced to death for 2 additional killings.
Damn.
When Washington eliminated the death penalty, those sentences were converted to life imprisonment. Number 1, Gary Ridgway. The Green River Killer is the most infamous prisoner in Washington. Ridgway pleaded guilty to murdering 48 women and later admitted to a 49th killing. He received 49 consecutive life sentences without parole and remains imprisoned at Washington State Penitentiary.
Now, I don't think it was nobody badder than Cuz on the 49 side of the game. Jeez Louise. Gosh darn it. Well, y'all, we at the end of the road as far as the crime go. I gotta save some for the next broadcast, y'all. I appreciate y'all rolling with me. If y'all have made it this far, I need y'all to go ahead and subscribe and hit the like button then. And come holler at me tomorrow night, because we're gonna do this again tomorrow night. I gotta save it. I can't give you all the jewels now. Shout out to everybody that done threw me some jewels and threw me some super chats and all of that. I appreciate y'all. Y'all helped the broadcast go along. Shout out to my mods and anything. But we had such a nice chat tonight. Everybody was cool. There wasn't nobody saying no BS. This is the kind of vibe I like. Yeah. Oh yeah. We even got across the pond in the crib in the house tonight, watching the crime. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Washington was like that, wasn't it, Barry? Washington was straight like that. Quaz, QAZ, I got you. We gonna find. I think they got a Louisiana there. You gotta come tap in tomorrow night to see that one. So we're gonna go through Utah tomorrow. Matter of fact, I can tell y'all the ones I got for tomorrow because I want to save a few. I ain't want to get y'all. We got Utah tomorrow. We got Alabama tomorrow. We got Colorado, Indiana. It's 50 states, for Christ's sakes. Don't look like they got all of them, but whatever ones that they didn't do, we gonna do. They got another Pennsylvania. They got another They got Arizona, North Carolina. Oh yeah, it's gonna get real deep. Idaho, Kentucky, Illinois. Oh yeah, Florida. Oh yeah. We're gonna have some fun. They got Florida inmates and death row, so it's gonna be cracking. Ohio, Texas, Angola, that's Louisiana, so we got that. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Well, y'all meet me here tomorrow, man. Y'all gonna meet me here tomorrow. I think they do got a Maryland. No, you know what? I don't even think I seen a Maryland in there. I don't think so, because I didn't make these. But now, trust and believe, the way I see them putting together this content is only the next step that I put together my own top 10s and stuff like that. So I'm already thinking about how to craft these same joints, because it's super easy. It's just pictures and some AI, and I can do it too. But yeah, man, they got a whole bunch of joints, man. So we got some stuff to crime out with. Y'all my best people to crime out with. I appreciate y'all criming out with me. You know what I'm talking about. And I ain't gonna hold you, but I'm emoji focus about being on code. And you know I got 4 words for you. I need you to go ahead and subscribe for the vibes. You know what I'm saying? I need you to go ahead and like for the spike, comment your vomit, share if you care about getting crime everywhere. please do that on the platforms that you own, Jones. And just to bring it all the way home, I got love, peace, blessings, and aloha. I'm out the Doha for Shoha. Crime already all night. You already know. Yee!